Welcome to Around the SEC, where we take a trip around the greatest conference in the nation, following the biggest storylines and making bold predictions. I'm Mikayla Kelly.
And I'm Micah Farmer. Today, we're recapping the biggest games from the weekend across the conference, picking our teams of the week, debating the college football top four, and making predictions for this weekend's matchups. All this and more today on Around the SEC.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Around the SEC. Back again for this week's episode, we've got Kegan Miller. Kegan, how are you today?
I'm doing great today. Always a pleasure to be around the SEC, and excited for all the fun college football we have to talk about today.
Well, we're excited to have you, and it's a sneaky good weekend in college football this week.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's jump right into it. And we start off with one of the shockers from the last weekend, and that's the #1 Georgia Bulldogs rolled into the Plains as a 14.5-point favorite and was nearly upset by an Auburn team that had been struggling. In the 128th meeting of the Deep South's oldest rivalry, Georgia secured the win by only a single touchdown in the last quarter. What improvements did you guys see from this Auburn team coming off that embarrassing loss in Texas A&M and then to come in a week later and hang in with the #1 team in the nation?
Well, what I saw was a functioning rushing attack, which is something they were not able to put out there versus Texas A&M. Getting 219 yards on the ground, that's going to help you a lot. And I think we also saw that if you can contain Brock Bowers like Auburn was able to do in the first half, you can beat this Georgia team. But as soon as you let Bowers get going, it is so hard to stop that Georgia offense.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. What we learned first and foremost is Georgia is beatable. I mean, that should be in every SEC East and some of the West teams that play on this year.
I think we
on
kind of thought that.
On their whiteboard. Yeah, Georgia's beatable. They're not what they've been in the past few years. You can go in and beat them, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, the Auburn rushing game was there, especially with the outside runs. You know, most of our runs for gains were when either it was an inside run that Jarquez had to bounce out, or just a design outside run, or even a quarterback draw. I wish we could have seen a little more improvement in the passing game. But I think that'll come later if we can get a running game or some type of offense to move down the field.
Yeah.
Now, Hugh Freeze was more involved in the play calling this week. Do you think that played a factor in how well they played?
I think it did. You saw a lot more read option, RPO type stuff, and I think that helped out Peyton Thorne with not being limited to just being a pure pocket passer for the game.
I'd be interested to see how involved he was on the third down calling, because I think we ran the same play 8 times on a third and less than 4 when we just tried to run up the middle with Jarquez, and it worked all game. But every time we got third down and Peyton was in the game, they would just load the box, and Georgia knew what was coming, and they stopped it every time. So, I mean, I'd like to see some improvements on third down play calling.
Can't get too predictable, but one thing I do want to point out is that I do think the offensive line stepped up for the first time this season. They gave up 15 negative plays in College Station last weekend, and they did not allow a single sack this week and no tackles for loss. So the Tigers also tallied 2 turnovers with 1 fumble recovery and 1 interception, and these things can make or break teams. So it was nice to see that we were finally forcing turnovers on defense and not giving them up on the offensive side for once. So what do you guys think, and I think it's pretty obvious, was the key factor for Georgia that allowed them to win that game?
Well, the key factor is Brock Bowers. Bowers had 8 catches for 157 yards and a touchdown. And the fourth quarter, it just felt like we would back Georgia up into a 3rd and long, and then Brock Bowers would be wide open over the middle on 3rd down all the time. You would think at some point they would make the adjustment, but Bowers is just that good to where sometimes even when you try, you can't make the adjustment. And I think if Bowers is able to get going, this Georgia team is going to be a lot more difficult to beat.
Yeah, and I mean, Bowers has been praised all week, but something that I haven't really seen praised a whole lot is just how well coached Georgia was as a team. I mean, both teams had very few penalties, but to play in Jordan Hare and not get a single false start or jump off sides or miscommunication or anything like that, I mean, that just shows how well Kirby has taught his OCs, DCs, and just everyone in that program, and just how well coached they were.
Which
so
is
props to
impressive
Kirby.
because that place was rocking.
Oh, it was loud.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Stadium was shaking. And you bring up Brock Bowers, that kid is just insane. Easily the best non-quarterback headed into the draft. Easily the best tight end in college football right now. And averaged 19.6 yards per reception. That is an insane stat. And they claim that they had the guys on him, but a guy like that, you need everyone on him.
Yeah.
And I think that was the ultimate downfall for them. But it'll be interesting to see which NFL team picks this kid up next year because he is special. And for Auburn, they get the bye week before they head down to Death Valley. So hopefully they take this loss, my bad, and can turn this into wins going down the line, because if you can hang in there with the number 1 team, hold them to a single touchdown, there's no reason you should be struggling the rest of the season. So hope they take this weekend to rest and really prep. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Last weekend also saw the highest scoring SEC game of the season so far in Oxford, as Ole Miss took down LSU 55-49 to bounce back from their loss to Alabama the week before. The Bayou Bengals now have 2 losses on the season despite high preseason expectations, and we are barely in October. Do you think this LSU team can recover, or do you think their preseason expectations of winning the West are just a dream at this point?
I think the West is out for them. They've already lost to Ole Miss, and Alabama's already beaten Ole Miss, and they have 2 losses. One of them is to a very good Florida State team, and Ole Miss is good themselves. But, it's just not their year. Brian Kelly shocked a lot of people last year when there was probably more doubt on him last year going in. So that's where some of the high praise came from preseason was, we took a team last year that we didn't know what they were going to be and had a really good year with them. So there's a lot of expectations, and I think just reality has set in for Brian Kelly and LSU this year. Still a great team. Jaden Daniels is still great, but just the West is not in their future this year.
I agree. I think the only path is if they beat Alabama and then Ole Miss completely crumbles. I think that's kind of the only way. Right now it's looking like Alabama's going to take the West simply because of Ole Miss lost to them last week, unfortunately. And I think LSU, they definitely have an impressive offense. It's no surprise to me that a Jaden Daniels-Jackson Dart game was the highest scoring game in the SEC. He had 7 touchdowns on 12 drives, but right now their defense is holding them back, and that's going to be their ultimate downfall. When you're playing a team that has a quarterback like Jackson Dart, you got to pressure them. That's what Alabama did. That's what helped them secure the win, and if you don't, it's not going to fly, and that's ultimately what happened.
Over 700 yards is what they gave up to Ole Miss's offense. So you're not going to go anywhere giving up that kind of yardage to anybody.
Yeah, and you talk about pressure. One guy that was supposed to be that guy this year for LSU was Harold Perkins. And if you watch LSU games this year, he's consistently been almost invisible for the Tigers. So he's got to get it going if they want to start getting pressure.
Exactly. You can't just rely on Jaden Daniels, as amazing of a quarterback as he is. And jumping up to Lexington for a battle in the East, Kentucky cruised past Florida 33-14. And I think everyone thought this was a pretty even matchup. Last week, Micah, you took Florida.
Oh, don't remind me.
And I took Kentucky with caution. That was my risky pick of the week, I said, which makes sense because Florida had a huge win over Tennessee in the Swamp, and Kentucky had yet to make a statement win. So I think we thought it could swing either way. But this was most definitely a win that proved that the Wildcats are here, and they are definitely here to compete. How legit is this 5-0 Kentucky team as they head into Athens this weekend for a matchup against the number 1 team in the nation?
So I've been watching this Kentucky team all year, and I've been excited about them. But even last week, my official pick would have been Florida, but I was kind of back and forth all week up until kickoff. But watching that game, I think I fell in love with this Kentucky team. I liked him all year, but Ray Davis is my guy right now. He's been unstoppable, and I think he's going to just get better and better and better. And watch out, because he's going to be a dog in the SEC East, and every team he faces is going to have to figure out something to stop him. And I just don't think they will.
Yeah, each year you look at the Kentucky teams under Bob Stoops, and they're so physical all the time. And I think Ray Davis really embodies that for this Kentucky team. I do think you have to look at Florida and say, okay, maybe they're just not very good, and that environment in the Swamp carried them to a win over Tennessee.
For sure.
You look at this team that was supposed to have such a good rushing attack, and they had only 69 rushing yards versus Kentucky, which is very bad. So credit to the Kentucky defense, but I think Florida, they kind of came crashing back down to earth.
Right, yeah. Which Kentucky outrushed Florida 329 yards to 69 yards. So, and you have to give props to Ray Davis. That kid's a beast, leading the SEC in rushing yards right now. Easily the best running back in the SEC right now.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
He had a receiving touchdown too, as well as a touchdown he broke for 75 yards, and that makes 3 straight wins Kentucky over Florida, which is not something we've seen in the past 40 years.
Yeah.
So.
And Kentucky looked aggressive on almost every front. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when they take on the top dog, if you will, next week in Georgia.
A revenge match was also on the card this past weekend, as South Carolina traveled up to Knoxville to take on Tennessee after humiliating the Volunteers 63-38 in Columbia last season. The Volunteers were able to get their revenge, though, winning 41-20. How do y'all feel about this Tennessee team as of right now?
I know Tennessee fans are happy right now, but the truth of the matter is they beat up on a not-so-good South Carolina team, and I think they need to realize that and calm down.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely.
Yeah.
I will say I think this is a team that plays with passion, and I think that is what played a role in this win. You saw what happened last year. They were not letting it happen in their home stadium, night game. The atmosphere was crazy, and I mean, let's just say the South Carolina team is just officially not good. This game proved it to me. I went back and forth thinking they could compete with them, but right now Spencer Rattler's carrying this team on his back by himself. I don't really see anyone else helping him right now, and they took advantage of it. They knew he was the best player on their team, and they sacked him six times and forced an interception. So,
well, I mean, so Milton threw 2 picks. South Carolina's defense gave up 500 yards. You take away the yardage that South Carolina's defense gives up, I think if South Carolina had defense at all, this game's close, and maybe even South Carolina wins. So Tennessee fans are stoked about the win, but they struggled. It wasn't a struggle win by score, but you can look at it and say they did struggle to win this game.
Yeah, for sure. And other teams you play later in the year are going to have a defense. I think Tennessee will run into some problems, and they play like a Kentucky later this season.
Yeah.
I do think Joe Milton needs to get a little bit more accurate. He's got an arm, obviously, but if you're going to throw picks and you're not going to get the ball where it needs to be, there's going to be some issues. So we'll see if he continues to develop, because I think that will be the deciding factor for this Tennessee team.
Yeah. Staying in the SEC East, let's give some props to the Missouri Tigers, who knocked off Vandy to move to 5-0 for the first time since 2013. Do you guys think this Mizzou team is legit, or are they benefiting from a fairly easy schedule to start their season?
Can I just say that I love watching this team's Cinderella story play out, and I really hope it isn't cut short against LSU this weekend.
Yeah, this team is my kind of SEC crush this year. Brady Cook has been great. Luther Burden might be one of my favorite players to watch in college football this season. He's so good. He's such a crisp route runner, and he's burning everyone that tries to cover him right now. So I think this Mizzou team is legit.
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at Missouri, we've talked about them, but this is the weekend we're going to find out just how good this offense really is, and even the defense. You know, everyone talks about Missouri's defense this year, and I mean, this is the weekend that we'll find out exactly who this team is and what this team is capable of. So, I mean, I'm excited to watch, but we'll see.
Which I think a lot of people are questioning if this is maybe a fluke or not, but they have legit playmakers on their team. Luther Burden III's leading the conference in receiving yards. Running back Cody Schrader is second in rushing yards, and Brady Cook is fourth in passing yards in the conference. So it's not like they're just getting these lucky wins. Yes, they have an easier schedule. They have yet to hit the harder stretch of their schedule, but they also have that ranked win over Kansas State that no one saw coming. So it's not like they're just sitting here cruising by. And I think they have a real chance to compete with LSU this weekend if they just don't choke under the pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of going to play the bad guy here, and I'm going to say that it did take, a miraculous 61-yard walk-off field goal to beat Kansas State, and that's really, if we look at their schedule, the only team that they've played. I mean, let's be honest, Kansas State and a bunch of nobodies, and they just barely beat Kansas State. So while I do love what Missouri's doing, I don't think they keep it up very long.
Well, we'll have to find out this weekend when they play LSU.
Yes.
When we come back, you know what time it is. We pick our SEC Teams of the Week.
Welcome back to Around the SEC. It's time for one of our favorite segments, SEC Team of the Week. Not necessarily who's doing the best overall this season, but who deserves a shout out for an excellent performance this weekend. And I'll start with my Team of the Week, the Tennessee Volunteers. They were on a clear mission, revenge. Less than a year ago, South Carolina absolutely beat up on the Vols. And what did the Vols do this year? Serve the Gamecocks a 41-20 beatdown right back. Look out, I think we wrote off Tennessee after losing to the Gators, but they're still only 4-1, have a solid defense, starting to find their offensive identity a little bit, starting to get into a rhythm, but we're going to have to see. Potentially, the biggest test for them is when they get Georgia at home. Luckily, they get them at home, but other than that, we're going to have to just see. Kegan, who's your Team of the Week?
I'm taking Kentucky. I mean, you heard me talk about them earlier, and I'm going to talk about them later in the show. Just some exciting picks later. But, I mean, Ray Davis, like I've said, I mean, I've kind of fallen in love with him in this offense. But also, Maxwell Hairston in their defense. I mean, he had 10 tackles last week, 8 of them solo. He didn't get a pick last week, but he still has 3 on the year. And, I mean, they have playmakers. I love what Stoops is doing. And, I mean, Devin Leary didn't look great on Saturday. But
you don't necessarily need to look great when you rush for that many yards.
Right, where he looked bad, his defense and his rushing game picked him up and took him. So, I mean, they're my team of the week, Kentucky.
Yeah, completely understandable. For me, it's going to be the Ole Miss Rebels knocking off LSU in a shootout like that. In previous years, I think we'd see a Lane Kiffin-led Ole Miss team maybe stumble again off the back of an Alabama loss like that, and that could be where kind of Ole Miss loses their season normally. And yet they were able to bounce back and take care of a high-powered LSU offense. Jackson Dart played really well in this game, going 26 of 39 for 389 and 4 touchdowns, and most importantly, no turnovers. So I think you really have to give credit to Ole Miss for bouncing back strong, and so because of that, they're my team of the week.
I think we both thought they were going to crumble because we came in saying Ole Miss is going to win this game, and then last minute changed it to LSU, and they proved us wrong. So I really thought they were going to crumble under the pressure. Like I thought after that Bama win, that kind of sealed it for them, but who knows what could play out in the West. They could end up coming back on top. We're just going to have to see.
Yep. Now let's shift focus to the SEC West race. Alabama and Texas A&M sit tied atop the division at 2-0 in conference. LSU and Ole Miss each are close behind with one loss in conference play to this point. With LSU's Week 10 matchup versus Alabama looming large later in the season, which team do you think is the front runner for the SEC West as of right now?
So I have Alabama as my front runner for the West, but not only for the West. I also have Alabama as my front runner for the SEC hopes to make the playoffs.
Wow, that's a hot take there.
I think if SEC makes the playoffs this year, it's going to be Alabama because Georgia. We'll talk about this later. They may get some upsets in their schedule, but Alabama, I see them winning out, going to the SEC championship, and just beating whoever's in this championship. Most likely Georgia, and then at that point you have to put Alabama into the playoffs after their one loss being a very, very good Texas team. So not only are they the front runner for the West, but the front runner for the conference to make the playoffs. I mean, they continue to get better week in and week out. Milroe's finding his footing. He's getting better. That's what you have to see, especially from a guy who struggled early and got benched. I mean, he comes back and he shows his leadership capabilities. And I mean, this defense. Defense. That's what Alabama. That's what Saban preaches at Alabama, and that's what he's doing this year. I mean, looks like his defenses of old, and teams should fear to play this defense almost.
Well, they're carrying that team right now.
They are.
Yeah, I've been thinking exactly that. What you're talking about with the Alabama defenses of old. This reminds me of 2016 Alabama teams of this fearsome defense that they have going. And so for that reason, and I agree with you completely. I think Alabama is the front runner for the West right now, especially because of how down LSU has looked this season. The fact that Alabama already owns the tiebreaker over Ole Miss. I think Alabama has a much easier road to Atlanta than the other teams in the West right now.
I agree.
I think Ole Miss kind of blew it when they did lose to Alabama. I think that kind of pushed them towards the front runner spot. But these next 2 weeks are critical for Alabama. They get Texas A&M this weekend in College Station, which they lost 2 years ago in College Station, and both games in the last 2 years have been decided by 5 points or less. And last year's A&M team was not a great team, and last year's Bama team, you could argue, is better than this year's team. So the Aggies have a chance here. They're undefeated, so is Bama in conference play. They have a chance here to pull off an upset, and then all of a sudden they're the front runners, and we're having a completely different conversation next week. So I think this weekend's really going to determine, and then when they get LSU, if LSU can beat them again like they did last year, then Bama falls down a few pegs. So I think we're going to have to wait it out in the next few weeks, but I think this weekend could really be a deciding factor. I think they need a statement win over Texas A&M for me to believe that they're going to playoffs, though.
I agree.
Yeah, I completely agree with that as well. Moving on to the SEC East, a division that seems to have much more clear frontrunner in the undefeated Georgia Bulldogs. However, Georgia's looked vulnerable this season, and the SEC East has some better teams behind the Bulldogs than usual. Do you guys think that someone on Georgia's remaining schedule can pull the upset? And if so, who do you think gets it done?
I mean, so we saw this last year when Georgia was a way better team. Missouri, no one watched that game at the beginning. But come fourth quarter, everybody in the southeastern states were tuned in saying, is Missouri about to pull this off? They didn't, but they got close, and Missouri's better this year. So there's a chance Missouri, but they have to play Ole Miss as their next team from the East. And Ole Miss has a very, very good shot at upsetting that. If that game was this Saturday, I would take Ole Miss to win outright. And they also have to play Kentucky. And that game is this weekend. And I don't want to spoil picks, but, there's a good shot that something gets shaken up. And it's in Lexington. There's a good shot that something gets shaken up in the East this year.
I'm glad you mentioned that Missouri game from last year because the team I think gets it done is the Missouri Tigers this season. I love this Missouri
We're
offense.
just manifesting out here.
Yes, we are. They're really good.
I don't think Missouri's all that.
So this Missouri offense, I think you look at this Georgia team, teams like Kentucky over previous years, you say, okay, they're physical, they're going to be able to out-physical this Georgia team, and then they go and they do nothing. I think that's what makes this Missouri team different. This Georgia secondary is not as good as it usually is. I think they are vulnerable for a team that has a great air attack like I think Missouri does, and so for that reason I think Missouri is very well suited to beat Georgia this season.
Right, and I don't think the question is who the upset will be or if there'll be an upset, but when and how many. Because I believe that there will be one upset against Georgia this year, possibly two. A third's probably not going to happen, but I mean they do have to play Tennessee in Knoxville, and but two is very much in question, but one is like almost 100%, I believe.
See, I don't think the Missouri Tigers get it done as much as we all wish that's what would happen. But I think Kentucky would be the team to do it. I don't think they're going to do it, but I think they're going to come close. But it's definitely possible. The Bulldogs currently ranked 11th in the conference in tackles for loss per game and gave up 219 rushing yards to an Auburn team that doesn't even pose a threat whatsoever and is led by Peyton Thorne. Not Devin Leary, and arguably one of the top running backs in Ray Davis. So they need to run that ball and just get through this defense, and I think that they can do it. Had it been played at home, I think the Wildcats get it done, but because it's in Athens, because Georgia gets dealt the best schedule they could have possibly been dealt, I don't think they get it done, but I think they do come close, and this is going to be the game of the week.
That's the thing. Like you said, Georgia gets so many of these teams at home. They get Missouri at home. They get Kentucky at home, and so their schedule is just so favorable, as it always seems to be somehow.
I mean, that's what you get when you are back-to-back national championship. They earned it.
Yeah,
and before we head to break, let's talk about the four teams sitting in playoff contention spots right now. And I think this is a hotter topic than last week when we were talking about it, because with Georgia narrowly escaping Auburn and they still can come in at the top spot, and I think that surprised a lot of people. They are then followed by Michigan, Texas, and Ohio State. Is Georgia really the number one team, and are they worthy of this spot? And who falls into your guys' top four?
Not only do I not have Georgia in my number one spot, I don't have Georgia in my top four.
I didn't either.
I think there are, right now, I have 5 teams ahead of Georgia, those in order: Michigan, Texas, Washington, Florida State, and Ohio State. I think we need to give some love, especially to Michigan. I know they're number 2, but it feels like they're having an anonymous season at number 2 to me, and they're just throttling everyone that they play. Blake Corum and this offensive line are going to run it down your throat and destroy you when you play Michigan, and so I think they deserve more respect from that. Obviously, we know what Texas and Washington are with their passing attacks. Michael Penix, Quinn Ewers, both amazing quarterbacks in Heisman contention. And then Florida State, even though their wins aren't as impressive as they were at one point with how LSU's kind of fallen off, I think you still have to respect the wins that Florida State has at this point in the season.
I just want to jump in real quick with Michigan, because I think people are comparing them and Georgia because they both haven't played hard schedules. But Michigan is crushing their opponents. Georgia's narrowly escaping South Carolina and Auburn. That's just not
If they play today, I think
me.
Michigan runs for 300-plus yards on that Georgia defense.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't think Georgia should be taken out of the top 4 just because they haven't lost, and their one struggle game was, in a packed Jordan-Hare, and that's in a rivalry game, so that game's always going to be close. But I just kept them out of mine. And I have Texas 1, Ohio State 2, Washington 3, and number 4 was a toss-up between Michigan and Florida State, so I kind of just flipped a coin and it lands on Florida State. So I have Texas, Ohio State, Washington, and Florida State. I mean, Washington, incredible offense, incredible quarterback. Ohio State, I mean, they've just proven that they can. The Notre Dame game win was huge for me, and I think that's a statement win for them.
I want to see more from Kyle McCord in a big game, though. If you stick Kyle McCord right now in a shootout with a team like Texas or Washington, I'm not sure that Kyle McCord is able to pull that out, so that's why I have Ohio State down at 5 right now.
Yeah.
So for my top 4, I have Michigan at number 1, simply because I do think they're the best team. I think they could beat any team right now. And yes, they played an easy schedule, but like I said, they're beating them by multiple points, not comparable to Georgia. Next, I have Texas, which they have 2 of the most quality wins in this top 4. They beat Alabama, which it doesn't matter what kind of year Alabama's having. If you beat Alabama, that's an automatic resume booster.
And Texas has a big weekend this weekend too. I mean, they play.
Yeah.
This will be on the show next year when they're in the SEC. But they play Oklahoma, and that's going to be a shootout in Dallas. So.
Well, I said if they beat them, they're the number 1 team.
Oh,
Put them at number
for
1.
sure.
Yeah.
If they beat Oklahoma, they're the number 1 team in the country. I don't think it's arguable. And they had that 26-point win over ranked Kansas last week, so don't forget about that.
To be fair, Kansas was missing Jalen Daniels for that game, so I think, as weird as this is to say, give the benefit of doubt to Kansas for a little bit, but I still think that is a very quality win for the Longhorns.
And then I had FSU. I think they had 2 quality wins and a win over Clemson. That's an ACC opponent that has typically dominated for a long time. And
Clemson's a tough place to play, too.
Exactly,
No matter
so-
how good the team is.
I think we have to see FSU continue on an upward trajectory to see if they stay in this spot. And then in the 4th spot, I have Georgia. And when you're the 2-time reigning national championship, you're not getting bumped from the top 4 or probably the number 1 spot until you lose a game. That's just how it works.
True.
And I just think the lack of quality win is what bothers me about this system. And just like to throw in there, you guys had Washington. I think if Washington beats Oregon this weekend, that is the determining factor if they are a top 4 team or not.
That game has game of the year potential, Washington, Oregon. That's going to
100%.
be insane.
And you touched on Georgia not having a quality win, but I mean, if they had beat Auburn, it wouldn't have been a quality win. So, I mean, they just don't have anybody they've played yet to be considered a quality win, and that'll come this weekend.
When we come back, we're making our picks for the biggest games across the conference right here on Around the SEC. Welcome back to Around the SEC. Now let's make some game predictions. Starting off with the game in Gainesville, you've got Vandy traveling down to Gainesville to the Swamp. Florida comes in as an 18.5-point favorite. Think it's fair, 3 p.m. kick. Who are you guys taking?
I mean, I'm taking Florida. I don't think this shocks anybody. I mean, Vanderbilt's having a Vanderbilt season, as we like to say. And Florida's going to bounce back from the Kentucky win. So, I mean, I'm going with Florida.
Yeah, Florida lost to Vanderbilt last year. It's not going to happen again, especially at home. I'm also taking Florida.
If you beat Tennessee in the Swamp, you're beating Vanderbilt in the Swamp. And
Facts.
so I'm taking the Gators, and I'm taking the spread as well.
Yeah.
Next up, we've got the Arkansas Razorbacks traveling down to Oxford, Mississippi to take on the Ole Miss Rebels. And the Rebels come in at an 11.5-point favorite. Who are you guys taking in this game?
I mean, I'm going with the Rebels. I don't think Arkansas's defense, we've touched on it earlier, can stop Jackson Dart and this high-scoring, high-power, high-pressure offense. And so, I mean, I think Ole Miss just blows them out.
Yeah, I completely agree. Too much offense from the Rebels. I think Ole Miss wins pretty easily.
I'm going to have to agree. I don't really have much more to add, so I'm taking the Rebels as well. Next up, we got potentially Missouri's first loss of the season, potentially not. You've got LSU traveling up to Columbia, Missouri to take on the Tigers of the North. So which Tiger are you taking?
Well, Micah, you're not going to be pleased with me, but Missouri gets their first loss this weekend to LSU. They're going to bounce back from a tough loss against Ole Miss. They need to clean up a little bit, give away or stop with the interceptions and turnovers, and they'll beat Missouri. I mean, Missouri's about to turn into the Missouri we've seen, so LSU wins by a touchdown.
Well, based on what I've said today, I think y'all already know where I'm going with this, but I am taking Missouri in this one. I actually trust this Missouri defense more than I trust the LSU defense at this point in the year. And so because of that, give me Brady Cook, give me Luther Burden, and give me the Missouri Tigers.
I think this is definitely going to be an offense-heavy game, probably a high-scoring game, so it's going to come down to which defense is going to stand out, step up to the plate. And do I really think Missouri's going to win? I don't know, but I'm taking them, and that's my risky pick of the week. So I'm taking the Missouri Tigers. Next up, another potentially interesting matchup. You got the Alabama Crimson Tide traveling to Texas A&M in their revenge match. They lost the last time they were there, like we said. And Alabama comes in at a 1.5-point favorite. So who are you guys taking, and do you think this is going to be a close matchup?
Well, I didn't expect the spread to be this low. I mean, a 1.5 is very low for an Alabama Texas A&M game. Even though the past few games have been close, and A&M has stolen one of them. But I'm taking Alabama's defense and Milroe. I mean, Alabama's going to win, but I think for them to win, I think this has to be the defining moment for Jalen Milroe. I mean, he has to step up, and he has to be the guy, the playmaker, if he wants to win. I think he gets it done this week, and I think this is the game that we look back on at the end of the year and say, this is when Jalen Milroe did it, this is when he won his team, and this is just when he got everybody back around him, and beats Texas A&M, and has a great season moving forward.
Yeah, I think this game is going to be super close. Honestly, if Connor Weigman was still there for the Aggies, I might lean A&M, but I just don't trust Max Johnson as much. Like you said, this Alabama defense is absolutely suffocating, so I'm taking Alabama to win this one.
See, I think Max Johnson's been playing better than Connor Weigman was, honestly.
I do like what I'm seeing from Max.
I think they're riding on this high. They beat Auburn. They just had another big win against Arkansas, but while I think there's a potential to upset, I don't think they get it done, and Nick Saban and the Tide take it in College Station this Saturday. And the last game, probably the biggest game in the SEC this weekend, the one I'm most excited for, you've got the Kentucky Wildcats traveling down to Athens, Georgia to take on the #1 team in the nation. Can they pull off this upset? Georgia comes in as a 15-point favorite. So do you think the Wildcats get it done in Athens or no?
I'm super excited about this game, and a 15-point favorite is ridiculous, I think. I don't know what Las Vegas was thinking. But, I mean, Kentucky's getting it done. This is my upset. Y'all have heard me talk about Kentucky all day. I mean, Ray Davis is going to get it done. We saw last week, Kentucky watched the game. They saw, whoa, Georgia cannot stop the run. I mean, they did it against an Auburn team, and Ray Davis is better than anybody Auburn's got in the running game. So, I mean, Ray Davis is going to run right through Georgia, and I think they get it done.
I agree with you. I think the spread is ridiculous. However, I have to take Georgia in this one as much as it pains me. I think we see this story so much. Oh, Kentucky's such a physical football team. They're going to be the ones that can take it to Georgia, and then they come in and they just fall flat. And especially with this game being in Athens, I think that happens again, although I do think it's close. I think Georgia wins.
Right, there's no reason for a team like this to lose to Georgia, but I do think teams tend to choke when they take on these top teams like Alabama and Georgia. It's just how it goes, but I'm taking Georgia, and hopefully this is a jinx, me taking Georgia, that they'll actually lose. But that's all we have for you today on Around the SEC. Kegan, thank you so much for joining the show.
Having me. I didn't even do this on purpose, but I'm wearing my Kentucky colors. I just noticed
Go
that.
Cats, baby.
Yeah, I guess so.
I'm Mikayla Kelly.
And I'm Micah Farmer.
We'll see you next time on Around the SEC.